Rainbow flags flutter on the front steps of the church. Impossible, unthinkable, like store-bought pasta sauce on Nana's dinner table. What is the word for Venn diagram where the two circles do not meet? Now that's just a sample of the poetry that makes up Unveiling the Queer Italian-Canadian Experience, which just opened to Winnipeg audiences at the Edge Gallery on Main Street. The work combines poetry and photography in an artistic Venn diagram that overlaps beautifully to share the unique struggles of being Italian and queer. The artists behind this exhibition are poet Liana Cusmano and photographer Vincenzo Pietropaolo. Both join me here on Classic 107. Nice to see you both.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It occurred to me as I was reading that intro to say that struggles might not be, of course, the totality of the queer Italian experience as well. So just to highlight perhaps the unique joys that probably also exist in this Venn diagram that is in your description, Liana, maybe not a Venn diagram from that poem. Maybe we can start off by getting into what do you think is unique about the queer experience in Italian-Canadian culture that maybe isn't represented when we talk about the experience of 2S LGBTQ+ people more broadly?
I think that the Italian-Canadian experience, those of us who are maybe second or third generation descendants of immigrants whose parents or grandparents were born in Italy and who came over to Canada however many years ago, have experienced this kind of fossilization of values and culture. And often those are not especially feminist or inclusive. And there is a pattern or a trajectory that a lot of people are expected to follow, which is that you would be in a heterosexual relationship and that you would get married and that you would have children. And this is not to say that queer people are the only people who don't necessarily do this, but for those of us who are members of those intersecting communities of being queer and of being Italian Canadian, often of an immigrant background, those two things tend to often clash. And so with this project, for which we've received a lot of support, including from the Queer and Trans Research Lab, that would be the Mark S. Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies out of the University of Toronto. It's been really wonderful to see people be so generous with their stories and tell us about how difficult it can be to introduce your same-sex partner to your Italian-Canadian family, but also how gratifying and beautiful and joyful it is to combine what we love most about being queer with what we love most about being Italian-Canadian.
There's so much within that to break down, Liana, and it occurs to me that there is maybe even more of a hidden aspect within that, within the Italian-Canadian queer experience, that there's this, maybe pride is the wrong word for like being like a good sort of, I'm using big air quotes here for a radio audience, like a good Italian, and that's just not maybe a part of that sort of stereotypical Italian experience as I'm processing what you're saying. Vincenzo, how hard is it then, given this sort of dynamic that Liana was just describing, how difficult was it to collect the images in your case for this exhibit? What were maybe some of the unique challenges that you faced as you undertook this project?
Well, I think the first challenge was to get people to understand what the project was all about, and to trust me with the camera. Once you establish a level of trust with the person who's in front of your camera, then it becomes easier and easier. And in that, once you reach that stage, it really is very little challenge, because the project is very much collaborative. It's collaborative on many levels. It's collaborative between photography and literature. So this is a literary photographic project. It's collaborative in terms of the portraits that I do. In other words, a portrait for me is not necessarily taken by the photographer. It's usually given by the person in front of the camera. And the photographer then has to be able to receive the project, the portrait and so on. So people often ask me, well, how do you photograph a queer Italian? And my answer is very simple. I photograph them in the same way I photograph anybody else, with respect and dignity. And so the pictures are basically straightforward portraits, which are done over a period of time, and usually in a favorite space chosen by the subject, where they feel comfortable. It could be their home, it could be a cafe, it could be a street corner, what have you. It could be an art gallery, and so on. And so I work with available light exclusively. So I usually look for window light or whatever it might be. I try and be as unintrusive as possible, and oftentimes Liana is present, depending on the circumstances. Sometimes because we're working in different cities, and sometimes if I'm working in Toronto, maybe Liana isn't present in Toronto for a particular project, a particular person or not. But the portrait only happens. The portrait session only happens really after we have met with them, talked with them, sometimes several times. In some cases it happens very quickly. But the main thing is the collaboration between the photographer and the person in front of the camera, and then that same person with the writer. So it's like a three-way collaboration.
So much trust that is involved in all of that collaboration, and everybody has to go into that sort of a collaboration, it occurs to me, with a lot of faith and a lot of inspiration that in what you are doing. Maybe Vincenzo, what you can tell us first, and I'll throw this to you, Liana, in just a second, but what inspires you to be a part of a project like this?
Well, I'm all my life I've been photographing social justice issues, and when Liana first invited me to join this project as an ally to the queer community, I realized that really this is another project about human rights or social justice, and it fits right into the interest that I have with photography. I think all art forms are a tool, can be used as a tool for social change. And in this case, we're trying to create awareness within the Italian community. And I see myself as functioning as a kind of a bridge, between the queer community that I'm getting to know more and more each day, and the mainstream Italian Canadian community. And by bridging the two, we're trying to create awareness, throughout. So what interests me basically is, to go back to your original question, is I'm interested in social justice, and this is clearly an important social justice project, especially now when we're faced with increasingly with pushback from all kinds of groups of, against queer people.
What about for you, Liana? What is that sort of spark of inspiration for you when the research that is being undertaken, as you mentioned, at the University of Toronto, is looking to put something like this together? What inspires you to be such an integral part of unveiling the queer Italian-Canadian experience?
I think it's just such a unique and special human experience that I count myself grateful and privileged to be a part of as a queer person, as an Italian-Canadian person. I think for a lot of us, and for just about everyone that we've spoken with, at one point or another, queerness and Italian-Canadianness were those two parts of the Venn diagram that did not cross. And so, as Vincenzo was saying, this is a social justice project because it is not, it's not fair or right or dignified for a human being to be hiding any part of themselves to fit without discrimination or prejudice in a community that is important to them. And so I, wanted to collaborate with Vince. We met at the Association of Canadian Writers Conference in 2018 in Winnipeg, and his body of work and social justice work is extensive and incredible. He was awarded the Order of Canada last week. He's a member of the Order of Canada. And I've been a poet for a few years, and poetry is where I was able to explore my queerness. I came up on the spoken word scene in Montreal. The spoken word scene is considered very inclusive and accessible as a scene that supports a certain art form. And it's only in the last few years that I've been writing about my queerness as it relates to my Italian-Canadianness. And I was really curious about how I could hear other people's stories and express a truth that speaks to me, but that also speaks to my community.
Mm-hmm.
As you combine these two mediums, the both of you, actually, before we go any further, we should probably say congratulations to Vincenzo on such a well-deserved honor. This is incredible. I'm wondering, as you combine poetry and photography within this exhibit, Liana, how do you think your representation of the queer Italian-Canadian experience would maybe be different if the poetry had just stood on its own? In other words, what does this other medium add to your work as an artist? And maybe Vincenzo, after that, I'll ask you maybe the vice versa question.
Yes.
I think the two art forms working together when they're sitting in the gallery space, I think about how they've sat in every gallery or every space. And I'm thinking about how the exhibit is mounted right now in Winnipeg. You have these poems and these photos that are the same size, at the same level, that can be appreciated or read from the same distance when you're moving around the gallery in any order. And so it becomes, I think, a very immersive experience where you can read a poem and imagine, you can experience whatever images or whatever feelings that will evoke in you, and then see a portrait of a person who is intimately connected to that experience in their own way. And so the poems, it's not always immediately obvious that they're about Italianness or that they're about queerness. Sometimes they're about both. Sometimes it's very clear and sometimes it's a little bit more subtle. But we've heard from people who, visit the exhibit who will say something like, oh, I saw myself in that poem, or I saw myself in that photograph, or who will say things like, oh, that really moved me, but I'm still not quite sure why. And I think that the strength and the power of that impact that occurs on people when they visit the exhibit, I think that really speaks to the power of the photos and the poems together. I think they would be powerful on their own, but not nearly as powerful as they are when they're together.
Nolan, can I add something to that?
Yes, absolutely.
First of all, it's very rare to see an exhibit where you combine poetry and photography, and where each of the two mediums has the same amount of space, the same amount of real estate. It's a terrible metaphor, actually, but the same amount of space on the gallery wall. So the poems are enlarged, they're as big as the photographs, so they can be read. They're beautifully produced on canvas, so they can be just on a piece of paper. They're very beautifully crafted, and the photographs themselves are like National Gallery type level prints. They're really gorgeous prints. But art, I would say photography in my case, has the power to make the invisible visible, the power to reveal invisible segments of society. So people say to me things like, oh, I didn't know there were queers in the Italian Canadian community. Well, here they are in these photographs, and also photography has the power to reveal, I think, if it's a good portrait, it reveals something about the inner spirit of that person. And maybe that inner spirit is a little bit vague, maybe it's ambiguous. And then you combine the photograph with the poem, and the two of them get kind of woven together, and they each give strength to the other. And so you have like a third language, and that third language is neither poetry nor photography, but a combination of the two. I think that's where the uniqueness comes of this project that we are involved with.
As you were at the gallery, then, as you were interacting on that sort of opening time, what sorts of, you touched on this a little bit before as you've been sharing this work across the country, what sorts of reactions were you hearing from the people who were at that opening?
Very emotional, very moved, and also very joyful. There are usually multiple generations of folks who come. So grandchildren will come with their grandparents, or parents will come with their adult children. And so it's very interesting, even just to see the people moving around the exhibit in the gallery, how sometimes they'll do it in pairs, or they'll split off if they came together, or they'll do it once and then they'll do it again. And so to talk to people as they're experiencing it, or after they've read every poem and studied every photograph, usually very emotional, I think.
I was watching people, as I often do at these shows, and so I watch people look at the pictures, and they look at the pictures, and then they walk to the next picture, and so on. Then I watch them look at the poems very quickly. Then they go back, they read the poem, then they go back again and look at the picture. And each time they look, with each new view of the picture, and with each new reading of the poem, or even a section of the poem, it's a kind of a deeper interpretation. It's a deeper, it has a deeper sense of significance or meaning. I think that what's interesting, what surprises people is our age difference, because we're generations apart. And I think that the interesting thing about the show, one of the interesting things, is that it's a cross-generational and cross-gender approach. So I'm working with a young young writer, and Liana's working with an older photographer. And that's actually an interesting, phenomenon in itself. And it's a very interesting experience that way. And people react very positive to that. And they go back and they realize that it's not so much pictures of Italian Canadians and words about Italian Canadians, as these are pictures and words about humanity, a section of humanity that is currently struggling to become more affirmative within its own community. Because some of these people, of course, are very well known or they feel very comfortable within the queer community, but not so much in the Italian community. And so they have this kind of this pushback back and forth all the time. And so we're saying, these are beautiful people. They happen to be of Italian origin.
Yeah. Vincenzo, as you watch people sort of engage with this third language, it's very interesting to hear you describe the photography. They look at the photography, then they read the poem, and then they sort of combine the two in that process, reading that third language. As you're continuing to see people across the country engage with this exhibition, what's your hope for those people in the Italian community who see this and it's something that maybe they have never considered before because it has been so invisible?
So invisible, so hidden. I think that my hope is that, and I can see that happening already, is that people become more, they open up their minds more, and they become more inclusive. And they say, well, if you're involved in this, it's kind of interesting. Why would you be involved in this? I say, well, I'm involved in this because the person who's queer might be your neighbor, your brother, the kid down the street, the older person down the way. It could be anyone. And people haven't really given it much thought sometimes, or if they have, it's kind of very hush hush. So we're actually, declaring it in the open, and basically that's why the title of the exhibition is Unveiling. In a way, we're kind of unveiling the queer Italian experience. We hope to do that. It's also people, after they look at the work, there's a very tangible feeling of emotion. The emotion runs very deep. The show in Winnipeg was fairly modest in the sense we weren't in the heart of the Italian community, but when we have had in the heart of the Italian community, as we had in Montreal and as we had in Toronto, some people cried. They said, well, I never thought I would see a show about Italians in this way. So, when there are a lot of stereotypes about Italian Canadians. One of them, of course, is everything is happy and cool and cute. It's all about food, it's all about hard work. It's also about the deeper significance of living a queer life.
Yeah. Maybe one final question for you here, Liana. As you reflect maybe on your own sort of coming out journey that you were talking about before, that you experienced through the spoken word community, what would seeing this exhibition have meant to you in that time?
It would have been huge. It would have been huge. I think I didn't, at the time, when I was coming out as bisexual and coming out as non-binary, I didn't know any out queer Italian Canadians who could celebrate the parts of their culture and their heritage that are important to them, and who could also celebrate their queerness and be open about their queerness. And so I think to have had that example, to have seen people exploring this or living this, and artists exploring it and giving it attention and spreading that awareness, I think I would have had more of a model to follow. And I think those models and that encouragement is very important, especially for young queer people. But as Vince was saying earlier, also for, especially within the Italian Canadian community, cisgender and heterosexual people, to know there are queer Italian Canadians. You can be both. They can inform one another, and that kind of combination of those two qualities and those intersecting identities just makes for a lot of us, that is how we are complete people. To not have to segment those things, to feel like, oh, I can't bring my partner to my grandparents' house, or oh, I don't want to talk about my Italianness in the queer community for whatever reason, or I don't feel like I can be my fullest self in one or the other of these places, I think that kind of hiding and repression and discomfort is ultimately so damaging. And so to have seen examples, to have seen people doing the work to celebrate this, to make this, to make people know about this and reflect on this, I think that would have been very encouraging to me as a young queer Italian Canadian.
May I just say one more word? That what the entire exhibition shows, it shows a slice of daily life, of the ordinariness of daily life, of ordinary moments in the sort of quotidian life that these people lead. They're not special locations. They're not special. They're dressed in whatever clothes they want to be dressed. They look like as they look to themselves. They're not being the narrative. In other words, that I'm trying to we're trying to create here is a narrative of they're just like anybody else. There's families. We have families we have families with children. We have older families, people in their 80s. We have people from different social classes and professions. So we have writers, all the way to mechanics, and that's fascinating, also. And one last point: I am so honored to have been invited into this project by a young person, a young writer like Liana. I just want to just say that.
A really special bond between the two of you, clearly, as you've created this, and a really special exhibit that Winnipeg audiences can see at the Edge Gallery on Main Street until July the 25th. We'll have more information at our website, classic107.com, and on the Classic 107 app. Liana Cusmano and Vincenzo Pietropaolo, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nolan. Thank you so much.